Firstly, just looking at those pictures on the screen, Adam, I think they're pre-pandemic.
Look at this! Look at this! Look at this!
It's a bit longer hair and a beard later, so we need to get our photos done again. But anyway, so everybody, welcome to this Return to the Office, but not the old ways webinar. It's a hell of a title, I know, and hopefully you get the idea of where our discussion points are for today. We are live. We have a big audience listening, so appreciate you all coming on. It just goes to show how important the topic is, and we're grateful that you're with us. So the session is being recorded. We have a few slides to go through, but it's not going to be too heavy. It's going to be very discussion based. If any of you listen to our podcasts, me and Adam do a fair few of those, so we're going to kind of keep it a bit like that. But we are doing it live today. It's not recorded. Exactly.
No pressure.
So yeah, no pressure. But our aim is to raise a few key points with a hope that it will spark some thought, interest, and hopefully inform you of something you may not have considered as part of this evolving landscape. We believe this is about your employees and users, and ultimately what their experiences will be based on them potentially returning to the office in some capacity. You can see the agenda on the screen. We'll go through each item listed, along with the considerations and concepts we at Softcat recommend that you may need to consider. But first and foremost, we are going to ask you to take a poll. We're going to make it a little bit interactive. It just means you have to click your mouse button without doing too much heavy lifting. And the points that are raised on the screen, hopefully, at least one of these is an option that is relevant for you. And while you're clicking that and the results come back, as Laura mentioned, we will have a Q&A at the end, but please feel free on the chat, and hopefully you've got a chat there to chuck in some questions, and we'll collate them at the end and come back and do our best to answer them. We will give you the opportunity to come off mute as well if you're bold enough to ask any questions to us. So we'll be happy to take those and give it a go. If we don't get the answer, we'll obviously take them away and come back to you. But as the poll comes through, it's interesting that, timely as it might be, the BBC article, if you've seen it today, came out, and there's been a big poll that they've carried out with a load of customers, and it's interesting that the results have come back based on their analysis that hybrid working and people may not be returning to the office in the old way. So it's interesting, and there was a bunch of other information. So I recommend you go and look at that article. It's quite fascinating, and I think it's timely that we're doing this today. So hopefully we've got let's have a look, some results back. So hopefully you can see all those results. So the percentage winner is predominantly remote working. A few they're office based, but you can see the split. So interesting to see that there's a few there that are looking to return fully to the office. But I think we're getting to the point where that hybrid working model, people coming back or working remotely as a mix, is kind of where we all are. And so let's move through if we can. And we'll start by saying the industry is just over 12 months ago had to go into react mode and create a user experience that was remote, and in some cases has turned out to be better potentially than what you might have got in the office. But the environmentals, the way people are collaborating and interacting, even down to the fact that we're doing these sort of events and have got used to doing these sort of events in this way, where we're not in the office, we're doing it remotely. But obviously there's some challenges with that as well. But it's interesting that now obviously things are starting to open up, and they will do over the next few months. Certainly in the UK, there's going to be an opportunity for you to go back into the office and work in that hybrid way, which brings back more travel time, et cetera, et cetera. But that flexibility of doing both, I think, is where we all are. So the way we are recommending organizations look at this, and certainly we're doing this ourselves, is to focus on how you are defining your strategy on how that is going to work. We never had an opportunity when lockdown came last time to define a strategy. It was a react mode. It was, we need to enable our users to work in a way where they can log in and do things they've done before, but in a continuous way. But a whole range of challenges came up, including us. So how do you now look proactively to define a strategy? And we've broken this down into three additional R's on top of the react. So we're looking at reassess, refine, and reimagine. And I'm going to lean on Adam a little bit just to explain a bit about what each one of those sections mean. So morning, Adam, over to you. If you can define a bit more detail about what these strategic areas are.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as you mentioned, Dean, 2020 was a year that most of us on this call were forced to take a bit of a step back and ask ourselves the fundamental question: can we build an organization that works together even when it's apart? And okay, in the early days, things may have been a little bit scruffy around the edges. We may have lost some ground on user experience. We may even have had to take a step back on the security posture. But as a result of some fairly Herculean effort, we absolutely got there. As a community, we got there. But that really wasn't the end of it. Over the past year or so, that employee experience has been absolutely obsessed over by leadership teams far and wide, and has continued to develop. Quite often, the apps, the devices, the workflows, and certainly the work styles are quite a distance from where they were when we launched into the lockdown with a mend and make do kind of attitude. On the other hand, for many, I think the office itself has stood still. And I think that bringing the office back into the mix needs to add a string to our bow rather than stifle the progress that's been made by so many people and so many organizations. We're not trying to support the same world we left behind. And to keep the office relevant, some of you and to an extent Softcat as well, we're doing a bit of this, are going to need to make it relevant in the first place. So step one for us is the reassess phase. It's about looking inwardly. It's about thoroughly unpacking any new work styles and workflows and changes that you've made to accommodate remote working, so that we can learn from the coalface and protect the good bits whilst understanding where we've been missing out or falling short because of that remote work. Thoroughly understanding what is the purpose of the office to us and our individual organizations. And it'll be very different. It's going to be very different if you are air traffic control as to whether you're a law firm or whether you're Softcat. It's going to have a different purpose. Then it's about refining. So, this is where we apply the lessons we've learned and adjust our strategies or even our tactics to bridge the technology gaps and finesse the technology overlaps, actually, that might have been introduced, whilst also bolstering the infrastructure that is probably going to need to bear a very different weight and certainly usage pattern than what it was originally designed for. And then I suppose once you've taken stock, once you've reassessed and refined your IT strategy for this next phase, hopefully you'll find a moment to look a little bit further ahead, to truly take the time to understand the technology at your disposal, because I think that a light has been shone on a lot of new ways of doing things during the pandemic, and reimagine the way you could work and the employee and customer experience that you could achieve, basically, if we stop playing by the old rules.
And so, I find that fascinating, because I think what we found is that technology has innovated in that period as well. A lot of the tools we're using to that React mode has brought on new ways of innovating and changing the way you work, just by the fact that you're using tools and your training tools. We look at trying to introduce Microsoft Teams a few years ago or a year ago to an organization. It was easier to do it when everybody had to start using it for something. Same with using Zoom. Suddenly everybody started using it in their day-to-day. So we're now seeing that almost become the DNA of how people do things. Now taking that back into the office can bring some challenges, certainly, because obviously there's a lot of cloud-based workloads and a lot of activity that is different to potentially what you were doing 18 months ago. So it's about addressing that. The innovation in some cases will come with the technology. It's how you accommodate that and bring that into this hybrid working model. So a strategic approach is what we're recommending to that sort of review, aren't we?
Yeah, I think the general gist, I probably said it in a really long roundabout way, is the world continued to move on and the infrastructure we left behind didn't. And there's just a gap has appeared. And we need to be respectful and mindful that I don't want the office, working from the office, to almost be a penalty. I don't want the experience to be worse. I'm not talking about the soft stuff. I'm talking about the fact that this is a weird fact. Probably as soon as the pandemic dropped, I stopped receiving phone calls about work, and everything was a Zoom call or a Teams call. And that's not even an exaggeration. The first 2 calls I've had in the last, whatever it is, what have we now, 14 months, were both last week from people that had gone back to their offices and just absolutely couldn't make Zoom work for them, because the environment just wasn't ready for it. And I think we've got to be mindful of that, it can't be two steps back. I think bringing that office back into the mix has got to be a positive experience. We've got to figure out, how do we make it part of that new employee journey and that new customer journey for some of us.
And so just on that, as we move on, we've broken this into, I suppose, 3 technology themes, haven't we? So the strategic area, focus on that, how you're going to build out a plan to accommodate, and have that plan being relatively flexible to when problems arise, tackle them. Because you need to. User experience is critical. So we've kind of broken this into 3 key areas, and workspace and collaboration is that first one. The user experience has changed, the way users working from home, their setup, the devices, the way they interact and collaborate, etc. On here is obviously a picture. It looks like a picture on the right hand side. I'm not sure how you're seeing it. It looks like a picture from the 80s. But the key thing there is that we have set up environments at home where you have risers and you have multiple screens, and organizations have invested in those things. No desk phone as an example. Whereas obviously going back to the office now, who has looked at that environment? Who has looked at how that desk is looking? If you go back with these devices that potentially you never had before, can you plug into those screens? These are all things that kind of would create a seamless experience to be able to have that workspace and that collaborative way of working, as we all are in most cases now, having that seamlessly resolved as you start having this hybrid working model is kind of important. So how would you, and what are the areas would you consider, or our customers potentially should consider, around things like employee experience and how we manage those equipment and device areas and the meeting spaces when they go back to the office? What's your recommendation? What's your thoughts on that?
So that's a long question. Yeah, thanks. So I think I'd start at the top. So I think for us, the workspace, the digital workspace specifically, is the experience, and this we talked about, is the experience we create by securely connecting people, applications, devices, and data. And it's also the nexus, the crossroads between the cyber world and the physical world. It's the fabric that connects your people to each other, to your services, to your customers, your suppliers, your partners, your patients, your students. And more so than ever, I think that experience is going to differ from role to role and person to person, and even moment to moment. And the importance of that has kind of been reflected in the shifting of tone that we've seen, or certainly I've seen over the past 6 months or so. And Dean, I've mentioned this to you before. I'm sure a lot of people on the call are familiar with some of the more petulant statements, should we say, that used to crop up in the vendor collateral and the blogs and the vlogs and the industry rags, and from us included. I think we fell a little bit foul of this. Employees expect, employees demand, employees want. And the reality is, if I'd have spoken like that, I probably would have been sent to bed without any tea, and my mother wouldn't have spoken to me for a week. But right now, it's the employers rather than the employees that are starting to expect a consumer grade experience for their people that moves at a consumer pace, but with this kind of enterprise level of security and confidence baked into it or wrapped around it. And I think we've got to take that tone and apply it to every element of the workspace. So whether it's the physical environment, whether it's the applications, whether it's the devices, whether it's the way the services that support that. For Softcat, when I needed a chair in the same logistics and device lifecycle piece that delivered my phone and my laptop and my riser and my monitor and all this stuff, also delivered the chair. They're looking at the whole piece, the whole experience as one, which I think is really interesting. But that change in tone gives us an opportunity at this kind of pandemic reboot. But firstly, I think, thinking about from where I'm coming from, firstly, what I would do, and I think what we need to do, is to get a firm grasp of the outcomes we need to deliver for our colleagues. To that aim, we know things have moved on. We've touched on that. So we need to be laser focused on this kind of people-centric design. We need to go back, we need to re-engage, we need to capture the voice of the user through stuff like surveys, interviews, and focus groups. And I know we say that there's fatigue around this, but people tend to like to talk about themselves. So if they think they're going to get some benefit from it, they probably will get on board. But really get under the skin of these emerging employee personas, and let those requirements define the productivity bundles in terms of apps and devices and the peripherals you've talked about required for each person. And it's for in the office as well as at home. And equally, let those personas define how space within the office may need to be revised or reconfigured or even reimagined, considering we put the branding together. So we'll go reimagined to play more of an impactful part in that new customer and employee journey. And I think that's really important. But once you've got the people-centric design down, once you've all agreed what outcomes you're aiming at, you've got your personas and you've got this people-centric design down, what's really important this time round is to turn that into an experience-centric operation, because that's how we're going to start to tick these boxes on consumer grade experience and pace and change and evolution. And I think that this experience-centric operation is going to require us to do more with things like the workspace analytics tools to give us that vantage point of the user, wherever they may be and however they may be connecting to our services, because who knows where they are, you know? And the reality is, if you can't see it, then you can't control it. If you can't control it, then you can't measure it. And if you can't measure it, then how on earth are we going to improve it? And in the fluid world of hybrid working, which, you know, looking at the responses feels like that's where the vast majority of people are going to be, where pretty much everybody's remote ready, even if they're only planning to be in working away from the office maybe once a week or once a month, they're still remote ready, and we can't trust anybody to sit still. They need to give yourselves a fighting chance. You need to know your assets and build out like an observability platform so that you know how they're performing together, regardless of the location. So probably a bit of a long answer. Sorry, Dean.
Yeah, but in summary, user personas, understand the user and what they're using, how they're accessing stuff. The assets that you're giving out to the users, obviously there's multiple devices, how are you managing those, how are you keeping control of those, how are you securing those as well, or providing security around those things. And actually one of the bits that I picked up there, and I'm conscious of time, so we've got to move on to the next couple of areas, but the workspace environment, and the BBC article today was saying that the office environment could turn into just a hub, another almost remote location, in addition to the other locations that you can work, and that could be at home or in coffee shops. We've seen that, but fundamentally it's all possible now to log in, access those applications with the devices. But as an organization, you have to consider all of those experiences in an effective way, but also that hub environment, that office environment evolving to become more of a people-to-people collaborative environment, as opposed to and I'm not speaking for everybody, certainly I think from our perspective, productivity, longer days, we work in longer days, but there seems to be an element of more productivity in some cases when we've measured those things. And it's interesting to think that when you go back to the office, there are office distractions, but that's healthy for mental health, for your ability to interact with your colleagues. So it almost becomes a hub where you're going back to the office for maybe different reasons that you would have done 18 months ago. Strange.
I used to go home to socialize. Now people are going to the office to socialize and going home when they've got something important to do. It's a strange thing. I don't know whether people on this call have felt the same thing. But I think fundamentally we're building an anywhere organization, and therefore location itself cannot be treated as a barrier. It's an opportunity. The world is literally your office. We have so many opportunities now, and I don't see people going back to the office to push pencils and do paperwork. I see them going back to the office to do more. I mean, we use fancy words, collaboration work, but it's teamwork stuff. When people need to physically get together, you and I, Dean, we do a huge amount of workshopping and whiteboarding when we need space and we need all this kind of stuff. And it's very interactive. That makes absolute sense to me. Also, I've seen a lot of people do it with the offices themselves, introducing smart office technology. So IoT sensors absolutely everywhere to really make sure, one, it's safe enough for people to operate from there. Two, they can bring in a hot desk culture and make sure that scheduling and cleaning and who gets to sit where and the shortest possible path to it and all this type of thing are looked after. And then also extending that into physical meeting rooms. So the heating, the lighting, all that type of stuff, and the cleaning rotors again. So that, there's an efficiency model to it. but it allows these rooms to become dynamic and use for completely different purposes from 1 hour to the next, so you can make the most of it. And then on top of that, I think there's the sustainability piece, if I'm absolutely honest. Seeing a lot of people doing using the IoT piece and the smart buildings and offices and organizations to drive down their carbon emissions, which can be really important probably within the next 2 years as legislation starts to come in. And also, when I've seen people retrofitting the desks because a lot of them sent all their stuff away for home workers, a lot of people are not, well, thing one, what do we leave with them? You know, we can't keep asking to bring the monitors back and forwards. So as people are fitting out their offices, I've seen this shift from, we're no longer doing two 24-inch monitors and a separate universal dock and a separate webcam if you're lucky. Most people are going for one 34-inch monitor that's got all of that integrated, so it draws less power, so it takes up less space, so it's easier for you to reconfigure, and so it has one cable that you need to clean and one cable for them to break, because the amount of monitors in our place that are broken because they spend half the time having the wrong cable shoved in the wrong hole. It's crazy. But yeah, little stuff. But anyway.
Yeah, and it's a good point though. I mean, things like desk phones, do you need them anymore? I mean, ultimately, you know, but have you got an environment that can cater for the fact that you don't need a desk phone? So there's those kind of things, just that working space, that desk environment, just looking at it. Yeah.
I've been fine with that one, but yeah, let's move on.
Yeah, so moving on. So So we've kind of talked about workspace collaboration, creating a continued experience that is good, very good. So you're not kind of stopping people wanting to go back to that collaborative office or hybrid working way. And then obviously performance and reliability starts kicking in. You know, the apps and data, the experiences of accessing those things, the fact that cloud has come in, where users over the last, or customers over the last 12 months we've seen this accelerated the use of public cloud and introduced those applications, whether it's SaaS or whether it's with one of the hyperscalers. And then obviously the data that's continually blowing up everywhere, we're seeing it, aren't we? And the fact that the data center is moving into hybrid, and in some cases hybrid multi-cloud, those multiple platforms becoming complex. So all of that combined, along with the fact that you need to keep that performance and experience going when people do start filtering back to the office, that's a complex web of new stuff potentially that's been introduced. How can we bring all that together in terms of from an operations perspective, from a security perspective, and then just most importantly, how do we maintain that level of performance when you go back to the office? Based on what we can do at home now, because at home with dedicated internet, most of the time people have kind of sorted out some of those challenges over the last 12 months. The performance is pretty good if you've introduced a load of SaaS apps and you've got your identity strategy sorted and all the security. But how can we, when you go back to the office, how do you maintain that performance and that reliability?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it?
It's
difficult. Yeah. So yeah, I think you're right. I think once you've defined what your digital workspace experience or experiences, you know, because they might be different for different people at different times, as I kind of touched on, and you've got a handle on your starting point, i.e., you know what apps and data and devices and infrastructure and cloud surface you currently have deployed, and you know what's actually being used, because that's that whole shadow piece on the side, then you can start to explore the gap and work on transition plans, because that's the first case. We've got to get there first. And it doesn't mean throwing everything out. It just means there will be gaps, and it's a transition plan. You don't have to jump from the beginning to the end. You just have to understand where you're going. I think it's about asking some of those basic questions in the first instance. You know, is it secure enough? I know this sounds a little noddy, but is it secure enough? Yeah. Is it reliable enough? You know, is it always there when you need it? Is it fast enough? You know, not everything needs to be a rocket ship, but our consumer lives, which is kind of what we're looking to emulate, has taught us that we wait for nothing, you know? And is it flexible enough? Which means, is it big enough when we need it to be? And is it small enough when we need it to be? And these are questions that we need to ask ourselves continuously if we want to maintain an experience level, because at least 3 of those are maths based. You know, the reality is the numbers keep changing. And in all likelihood, with everything being cloud connected, from the applications and the data to the devices to the operating systems to, you know, on and on and on, they will continue to do so at an ever increasing rate of knots. And I touched on it a moment ago, but we've already started to see the likes of Teams and Zoom specifically crash back into the office, knocking wireless networks sideways, breaking the user confidence, because they'd rather work from home if they have an important meeting or call to make. And I think you've got to be careful of that, you know. And even if you just look at is it flexible enough piece? Based on supply chain constraints and the need for much more flexibility, we've started to see significant moves to cloud-based virtual desktop solutions, for instance, from the on-premise deployments, because they were difficult to scale in a hurry when you couldn't get on site and when you struggled to get hold of kit. And I think that once you understand where you need to be, you've then got to give yourself, again, I kind of touched on it, that fighting chance. You need to build out an observability platform that takes into consideration the vantage point of your users and the vantage point of those SaaS and cloud plays. You know, seeing a lot of people move to things like SD-WAN because they used to have real confident control over their WAN, but all of a sudden, most of the traffic's outside of their visibility zone. So extending the WAN out to right inside right within the hyperscalers makes a lot of sense. Extending it out to the front door of the SaaS players, because obviously we can't sit inside the SaaS service, but we can sit at their front door to give us control, visibility, the ability to add security layers onto it, and certainly the opportunity to tune performance makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I think you've got to embed flexibility in your infrastructure to help you. I think you've got to stay on top of your critical services. And we kind of touched on that a little bit in a minute, but you know, that's getting those basics right. It's keeping everything up to date. It's not running old versions. It's doing your patches, for God's sake. It's about staying current with every IT environment. It's about shining a light on the shadow IT that's specifically crept in over the last little while because people needed task management systems and time recording systems and all sorts of stuff that you need in a hybrid world that you don't when you could just shout across to Joe Blogs or whoever it might be to keep up to date with them. And I think you've got to reach out. You've got to be mindful that it's not just about speeds and feeds. It's not about the quantitative all the time. It's also about that sentiment. It's also about the qualitative. It's about reaching out directly to employees on a continuous basis, not doing one survey once a year, but drip feeding questions and answers over the whole course of the time. Get real accurate employee sentiment. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it gives you the blueprint on where to go next. You can stop guessing because you've got good data. And then lastly, baseline. We've got a great opportunity right now to baseline the digital employee experience, and then that gives us that metrics to continuously improve, and we can justify the money we've spent, and we can show the difference it's made, and that's going to help us do the next wave and the next wave and the next wave. So yeah, a bit passionate about that. But
yeah, so I mean, what you said there, I mean, the boundaries have definitely expanded, right? And that's what we're saying. And being able to bring that back to observability, having touch points based on applications that are potentially running in AWS, Azure, in Google, running SaaS on one of those hyperscalers or on another platform, got Oracle in there as well, as well as obviously a lot of organizations that haven't moved a lot of their stuff from the data center. The data center still exists, but may have struggled to get in that DC. But as they start introducing new workloads, and we've seen this a lot, in cloud, how do you bring that together as part of, understanding that landscape? And we're seeing a lot more organizations investing in those visibility tools, those observability tools, those API ingest tools, SaaS tools, if you will, to be able to get that access and visibility across those multiple landscapes, to be able to, as you say, baseline and then start creating better performance and creating increased reliability across that landscape. And obviously, in addition to that, the data explosion, it's not going away. Storage on premises extending into cloud, where it's really leveraging it in an effective way. We're seeing a lot more of that, how you connect those things, and we'll talk a bit about networking in a minute. But those things at the moment, they're not constrained by the four walls of a data center. The cloud, we can only look at the cloud figures. The public cloud providers released their quarterly figures, I think, last week. The increase is incredible in terms of the usage, but are people removing a lot of the technical debt from the data center? So how are you accommodating that expansion? And also, are you then increasing your cost? How can you bring that down? So I agree. I think that boundaries have gone out, connectivity, visibility, and obviously ensuring you have that all tied into something where you can keep not only a handle on it, but you can proactively improve it as you go along. So yeah, so interesting topic. The boundaries of the data center have expanded. The way you're managing data, the way your apps and data are deployed from multiple locations, having a handle, having observability, and providing some proactive service and support for that is going to be critical as we move forward.
Yeah,
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, Dan, I was just going to say just one other thing on that. There are other kind of more fundamental low level reasons for reliability. I think something that people have really struggled with, where we have started to see people creeping back into the office, is the interaction of their collaboration platforms. And I'm not talking person-to-person Teams calls. I'm talking, well, how do I engage with that big screen on the wall? How do I engage with the WebEx system? How do I, what's this desk phone thing for now? And it's about enabling people to rely and have confidence that there will be seamless integration, and it will basically be idiot proof. That's what we're really after. It's going to be simple as we possibly can for people to interact with the things that they used to when they're sat in front of customers or whatever it might be. So I think that's quite important. And the other thing I've seen from a reliability thing is a lot of people struggled with the contact center side of their telephony solutions, and just seen a huge amount of people, us included, start to move towards unified comms as a service platforms, because it's in that cloud, because then we can access it from any location on the planet. And trying to get back to Softcat, as it were, is no longer a limitation for us. So I think there's so much that can be done in that space.
Yeah. And underpinning both those areas we've talked about, workspace collaboration, performance and reliability, with that data center and cloud bit coming into the equation, networking and security, obviously huge subjects, and we could probably do a whole session on just network security, but obviously it's the last sort of section that we're trying to wrap around those two areas. And obviously networking is a prime example. We've mentioned it a couple of times today. If you get 100, 200 people, and obviously we recommend that probably you percentage your users back to the office, but it depends on how you want to do that, but have a percentage of users going back. Suddenly with these new devices, these new ways of collaborating, accessing these applications that are in multiple platforms, multiple clouds, and still running in the data center that you had them running before, that mix, suddenly going back to the office and then doing a VC call, or trying to collaborate in the same way, where suddenly there's multiple more users now accessing those technologies and understanding how to leverage them to allow them to have that experience and work better. That potentially becomes a problem, right? Because Wi-Fi hotspots and being able to get performance just by doing a VC call to various people, running a webinar to 140, 50 people, it suddenly becomes a challenge if suddenly everybody's congregated back into this office environment where those environmentals, if you will, those logistics haven't been considered and benchmarked against that experience. What do you think about that? Because ultimately that's a huge challenge for a lot of organizations. If a percentage of users go back, suddenly if that's a problem, as you say, will they want to come back? Will they want to come in, and if they've got a big Teams call or something they're presenting or something they're doing, what's the incentive there? It needs to be resolved proactively, doesn't it? Or at least be benchmarked to understand what the impact is.
Yeah, and I think that this kind of all comes back to make sure you know what you're aiming for, understanding the workloads that you've now got to support, not benchmarking it on what you used to have or you used to know. I think it's really important. And then I think I would encourage everybody to take a moment to carry out a network, specifically a Wi-Fi, but a network assessment of their office locations. I'll put our hands up and say Softcat are having to do some work in that area, because we have struggled. We're in some of our offices are in locations that we don't own the buildings. There's things like that to deal with. But yeah, go back through and do the basics. Do a coverage assessment, do a network assessment, understand where you've got black spots, understand what weight you really need to be able to carry, and make the adjustments. And I think that where you're going to, those organizations that are going to find it even more tricky is if they start to reconfigure their offices. So the areas that they used to cover are now huddle spaces or collaboration spaces or whatever they were. Whereas, maybe perhaps, and again, I think it's the same for us. We used to have lots and lots of thin clients. We used to have lots and lots of docking stations, and you had the right machine that fit into the right dock that blah 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 blah. You fitted, you were then wired, and it was much better. As long as the actual bandwidth and the connection into the building was all right, you'd be okay. But it's far more Wi-Fi dependent now. There's so many more devices coming in, and there's this everybody, so many more people have got laptops, for instance. If you look at our place, most of the account managers, well, all the account managers now have laptops. That's going to be like 800 new laptops that have just turned up. And whereas they used to turn up to the meetings within our, internal mobility, they used to turn up to meetings in our offices with a piece of paper and a pen, and then they go and write it up on their Citrix Thin Client or whatever. Everybody's now walking around with their laptops, expecting it to work. You've got 10 people in a room all trying to do a Teams call because, well, just because, really.
Yeah. And it's running from cloud, right? It's going out. It's going,
cloud.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's got to be consistent across the whole business. It can't just be, like I said before, there's an opportunity here. Location cannot be a barrier. And we've got to make sure that whichever office you're in, that includes whether you're in the shed, which if you could see, if I turn my screen off, that's where I'm now. You can have the confidence that you can do business without technology getting in the way. And again, it's get those observability platform tools in there. I feel like that's what this has turned into, but it does seem like a common thread. Know what you're aiming at, know what you've got, know it's performing, get on your toes and off your heels. Don't wait for them to complain, because they won't complain. The amount of customers we deal with where the users just don't call up the help desk and tell them they're having a problem. They just have this experience and think, yeah, it's a bit rubbish. Then that's what it is.
And the other area I've noticed over the last few months now is that organizations are coming up to look at things like their MPLS and their VPLS, these big invested networks that are everybody goes into that MPLS cloud, if you will, and breaks out. Suddenly, those boundaries, because of the way workloads run, and we've seen a big uptick in SD-WAN and the SASE stuff as well, being able to have that network security bridge linked irrespective of location, as you say, and having that adopted in a way where users, wherever they are in their remote and hub locations, not coming back into the DC and breaking out to the internet. They're going direct, basically, like we are now, from home, and having that kind of multiple points of presence, if you will, and thousands of them in some cases, linked into the fact that when you come into the office, you have to accommodate those same things and those similar technologies where you may not need to reinvest in that big MPLS. You can obviously break that down into different architecture needs and requirements based on where applications are actually running, and that's why looking at the overall networking, looking at overall your network strategy to support this new way of working is, for us, we're seeing critical, and certainly we're seeing a lot more customers asking about how that can be tied together from an architecture standpoint. And certainly I'll finish off and just talking about the security embedded around it. We're seeing a lot more organizations looking at how their identity works, how they can get SAML authentication by standard into the applications, SaaS apps, and having that almost hybrid or cloud-based user experience and identity linked into some sort of cloud experience, and bringing all that together as part of something that is consistent and works for everybody, with things like MFA, because obviously security and breaches are becoming common and attacks are becoming common. So setting up your environment and these multiple platforms to be able to respond to those in a much more effective way, and giving the user empowerment, but at the same time ensuring their data and their way they log in and access is secure. So I mean, I know it's things you've been doing for quite a few years with customers. How do you see that evolving over for the foreseeable future? I assume you see it accelerating.
Yeah, more really. The Daily Mail ensures that there's paranoia everywhere. Some of it quite rightly. So there'll be plenty of investment. But I think from a security perspective, there's the concepts, there's the frameworks, and then there's the basics that probably needs to be considered here. And it's not exhaustive this, but so zero trust is the security concept of the time, and it requires all users, even those inside the organization's network, to be authenticated and authorized and continuously validated for their security configuration and their posture before being granted or even keeping access to applications and data. And I think that's really important. And it's a fairly significant departure from traditional network security, which followed the trust but verify method, automatically trusting users and the endpoints within an organization's perimeters. So this isn't about a one-time validation. It's about continuously monitoring and validating that a user and their device has the right privileges and attributes to connect to any of your enterprise or cloud assets. And I think that's the concept that will come to the fore. Then there's the framework. So SASE, defined by Gartner, stands for Secure Access Services Edge. And I'd say it's possibly a bit of architecture at the moment more than anything else. But it's a security framework prescribing the convergence of security networking connectivity technologies, such as SD-WAN, into a single cloud-delivered platform, which makes a lot of sense. Now that your security and your connectivity need to be where your people and services are, which is pretty much everywhere. And then there's the fundamentals, and we can make a very long list. But for now, because I've got the mic, I suppose, I'm going to prioritize single digital identity, device trust, MFA, as you've spoken about, conditional access, I think is massively important. CASB, to try and get an eye, because there's a lot of stuff out there that you don't know you're using. And then I think I'm going to cheat a little bit and bundle app, OS, and firmware updates into one. Let's just call it updates. But I think that's the concept you want to chase. It's the framework you should be building towards. And if what you've got to make sure you've ticked off here and now are those basics. I think that's where I'm at. And there's always more you can do. But,
and certainly we've seen a lot more requests coming into us for that security baselining, right? So security posture baselining, understanding what it is, and putting some scores against it. And certainly, we've got some services we provide customers which kind of build that baseline out as a standing point to then go and as a launch pad to go and do something or improve it. So yeah, I mean, security underpins everything. We see that regularly. It's probably the number one priority we see with our customers. So everything you're doing, just make sure it's intrinsic. It's part of that overall architecture, overall application and data strategy. And more importantly, you don't want to compromise the user experience, but you want to make sure that it's intrinsic and part of it in a way that's almost invisible to the user, but it's making sure that you're keeping that governance and control in check, right? So that's kind of what we're trying to say here. And I think that, so right now, we're coming to the end. We've been going on for 45 minutes. We've got this holding page here to say if you want to know more. I think Laura's on. I don't know if Laura wants to cover this bit.
Yeah, thank you.
There we go.
Hello, thank you guys, such a great session. Just a reminder, as I said at the beginning, that we have created this digital guide that goes into a bit more depth about these areas and kind of gives a bit more detail on it. So please take the time to have a read through that, and we'll share it along with the link to the recording today after the session. And as I said at the beginning, if you've got any other questions, then please speak with your account manager or email marketing@softcat.com if you don't have one.
And if there's any questions, please raise. If you want to, if you've got the ability to come off mute, because I'm hoping you do, please feel free to ask. But if you're not, just please ask in the chat or the Q&A section. Is there any questions, Laura?
We've got a couple in the chat, haven't we?
Yes. If anybody wanted to come off mute or feels brave enough, then just raise your hand and I can unmute you. But if not, we have got a few from the chat.
Yeah, so I think I can answer a couple of these. So Andrea, what about app software to book office desks for more hybrid? Okay, so software that we've seen for kind of the smart office stuff that allows you to have an app that's on people's phones, or is a web app, or is available at the reception desk on a tablet and allows you to book desks, or meeting spaces, or office or meeting rooms. Sorry, we're seeing a lot of people using a company called Condeco. So Condeco. The reason people are using that is because they have done quite a bit of work with Microsoft and can integrate with Teams and have an app to integrate with Teams, which when we're trying to get to the point where we're not doing so much app switching and everything's kind of in one place, I think that makes a lot of sense. Another company that we've done a lot of work with and has been really successful is Smart Spaces. So again, cover the same type of thing. Fantastic for getting up and running extremely quickly. We've got a lot of people that need to get this done within kind of 2 weeks. So Smart Spaces has been done, is there for that. Other ones you'll hear about are people like Flowscape, people like AppSpace, but yeah, for us, Smart Spaces and Condeco are the ones we've been using more often than not. So hopefully, Andrea, that answers your question. And there's another one here, Matt. Oh yeah, thanks, cool. Does lovely. Another one, Matt. Blah 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 blah. relating to what are you seeing as a preference for selecting workspaces, random, agile, or more focused booking? If I understand your question correctly, which I don't think I do, if I understand your question correctly, we're seeing the division of work kind of fall. What used to be office-based tasks, email, create focus time, creating collateral, that type of thing, that's all happening at home. And then within the office space, we're seeing people put in a blend, and it's different for everybody, and you need to figure this blend out for yourself. But probably, I mean, I would say 30%, don't quote me on this, but 30% feels like collaboration space, bigger rooms, open plan environments, so bigger offices with lots of whiteboard technology and things like that, and comfortable seating and all that type of thing for collaboration and teamwork. Then probably another 20% of huddle spaces for team-sized activities. If you anything like Softcat, we do we do hundreds, if not thousands, of projects, and we probably do hundreds simultaneously. So we need lots of little huddle spaces to bring people together. But again, a lot of that's happening in Teams and in Zoom, and there's been this shift towards asynchronous work. So whereby someone like myself might set up a whiteboard, and then I'll invite people over the course of a couple of days to give their views and make their additions, and then we'll all meet back up a little bit later on. So I think that's kind of cutting into that, and then the rest is office space. But yeah, sorry, Matt, not a very good answer. Hopefully we'll cut that from the recording.
Yeah, no such luck today, but it's definitely evolving into that, and it's social, isn't it? I mean, Softcat's a very collaborative social organization, and a lot of our people have just missed each other. So there's a good reason to get back to the office and having that collaborative social part of it. I think it's a big part of our culture, and certainly one we encourage.
Dean, you might be able to answer this. So Camille has asked, kind of, I'm going to add a bit to this front of this. What are we doing? And have we redesigned our offices to adapt to a hybrid model of working? Now, what we're doing, and it's interesting because I've worked for Softcat for 15 years, and culture is very much at the forefront of what we think makes us stand out. And we were very nervous, I don't mind saying, about everybody not being in the office together, bouncing off each other, learning, supporting, all that type of stuff. But it's worked really well. We've been extremely productive, and we've got through this year really positively. At first, our starting block was we'll get everybody back in the office as soon as we possibly can. Then about maybe 6 months in, we said, well, we're going to introduce 1 day's working from home. You don't need to get signed off from your managers or anything. And that went down like an absolute lead balloon. And we've now kind of blended forward to, you are free to choose, but we still prefer you to be in the office most of the time, because we still think that culture. So that we've interpreted that, rightly or wrongly, most people have, as a 2/3 kind of plan. So that's what we're doing. Now, as to have we redesigned the office, we absolutely have. But I'm going to own up and say I have not been there, so I have no idea, Camille. So Dean, you've been there.
I have been in, and they have redesigned all the offices. So taking the opportunity to refurb everything, basically, and obviously then the facilities have done an amazing job at creating a slightly different working environment to the one that we had before. We have things like one-way systems, and we have desks that are slightly further apart. There's more meeting rooms, but those meeting rooms are set up to be much more aware, and the thought is about obviously trying to factor in stuff we don't know yet. Do we go back? Is social distancing going away? We don't know, so we're having to accommodate some of that. But yeah, the offices have been refurbed, all of them. So we've got 9 offices in the UK, and we've built them so they are much more adaptable to the situation we're in. But at the same time, absolutely, what Adam was saying, they've built them to be much more collaborative spaces, and certainly I think that has to be considered, and as part of what we're saying, it's the physical location, and we've mentioned it earlier, the workspace environment. So we have, and I think we'll see how that goes as people do start filtering back. But we are hoping that obviously there are, I say, almost a percentage of users that do come back, but there is a lot more flexibility than there was before. But the offices are accommodating that.
Cool. I think we've answered to some point, I think, most of the questions. So I guess that's it, Laura. Do you want to say la vie?
Yeah, thank you guys, and thanks everyone again for your time and joining the session today. We'll now end the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.